Hello there and welcome to The Value of Everything. Before I begin, it will be very much appreciated if you could consider to like, subscribe or share. So let's begin this episode. What will happen if there is a hard Brexit? Firstly, let us get some background events as to why Britain has chosen to leave the European Union. So back in 1975, the United Kingdom had a referendum to join the common market. It was the then Prime Minister Ted Heath, who was the leader of the Conservative Party, that brought the United Kingdom into the common market. Ted Heath passed away in 2005. However, in 2015, there has been a series of child sex abuse allegations. Mr. Heath and Jimmy Savile were well known as friends. You may question why I've raised this, but it is commonly known when somebody is in a position of power and they have been compromised for the threat of being exposed. They are working for a foreign interest. Now, on to the referendum in 1975. The actual question which was posed to the people was that, do you think that the United Kingdom should stay in the European community, the common market? And obviously that sounds like a very nice sweet thing to continue trading with Europe. I wouldn't imagine many people would disagree. However, could you imagine the reaction if the questions were posed like this? Would you like the European job market open to the UK for the UK job market open to the Europeans? Would it be okay for Britons to give up part sovereignty, meaning your elected politicians will not be able to make certain laws in the UK, so that European leaders can come to a consensus on making trade rules in a common market? So with that original question, the outcome was 67% said yes, they would like to stay in the European community, to 33% saying no. Of the registered voters, there was roughly a 65% turnout. As they say, the devil is in the detail. But you can see what is happening here. The referendum question has been framed in a particular way to an ideology, an opinion or view of the most appropriate way to govern. And then you frame that into a question: would you like to join a common market? Now, that's a very dangerous thing to do in terms of a referendum. So really, a voter should be given option A or option B, then be provided with the pure mechanics. What will be done, how it will be done, and then obviously you're in a predictive zone afterwards, so potential benefits and potential pitfalls. You could even make a classification or grading of the outcomes within living standards, freedom and prosperity or wealth. Some things can be set by objective standards, but where it comes to forecasting, a degree of uncertainty should be advised. One of the things that I try to advocate is a type of blockchain anarcho-capitalism, which is a society without any overreaching governments or powers. The blockchain uses public key and private key encryption, so you can transfer information or execute contracts, be fully transparent, and be private at the same time. Publicly you can trade, privately you are not stolen from. So there is an account ledger to somebody's name. People can see that that person is acting in good faith. So there is a fully transparent system where people are acting responsibly, acting on reputation. There is no requirement for that trusted party. So say for a government to step in to provide law, justice and protection. Once you cut out the middleman, you lose a lot of wastage, and that is an engine to prosperity. So when you choose to self-govern within a blockchain, you're working within the confines of computer scripts, and that is all running off if statements. If that's true, do this, or else do this. So when you are hard coding rules, it will be clearly defined as the logical steps of what to do. And of course, there will be choice, there will be decision forks, there will be one breakaway blockchain to another, there will be literally billions of blockchains and multiple societies people can choose to live within. That's all great for competition. It will be many failures, there will be many reboots and rehashes of different scripts. But really this all comes down to pure democracy, aka power of the people. So let me jump off my soapbox and continue with some more background on the Brexit. To appease the Eurosceptic contingent, David Cameron announced that if he were to win the 2015 election, which he did, he would provide a referendum on Britain continuing its EU membership. So the Conservative Party under David Cameron did end up winning, and that referendum was held on the 23rd of June 2016, in which 51.9% of the votes casted were in favour to leave the EU. Therefore, the UK government will intend to invoke Article 50 on the Treaty of the European Union. This is the procedure of withdrawing from its EU membership. This will repeal the European Communities Act 1972, which incorporates existing EU laws into UK domestic law. So Theresa May had put out a 12-point plan as to how she would like to proceed with the Brexit. And let's just go through those steps. Number 1, certainty and a vote in Parliament. So this will be a vote in both houses of Parliament between the Commons and the Lords. That's obviously turning into a bit of a fiasco. However, it should eventually be overruled by the Commons. Number 2, control of our own laws. So what she wants to do is take back control of UK laws and bring an end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Number 3, strengthen the Union. There is a lot of issues with certain countries like Scotland potentially wanting to remain a part of the European Union, even though this is being voiced from a Scottish Independence Party who wants to uphold its sovereignty. Number 4, prevent a hard border with Ireland. There's still some tension between the Protestant faction who want to be a part of Britain and the Catholic side who wants to unite the island as an Irish republic. So creating a border there does raise tensions. However, this might need to be a procedure because it could be an access point for undocumented migration. And here we go on to number 5, controlling immigration. But there wasn't really much in terms of detail. Number 6, guaranteeing people who have already moved. So this means guaranteeing the rights of EU citizens already in the EU as early as possible, and that is reciprocal. Number 7, protecting workers' rights. This was a key demand of the Labour Party. Number 8, quit EU single market membership. So this is where Britain most likely can't agree to free movement of labour and comply with the European Court of Justice. However, what Britain really wants is to keep the greatest possible access in free trade with Europe. Number 9, quit full customs union membership. So full customs union membership prevents the UK from negotiating its own trade deals. Really, this is what it's all coming down to, passing trade laws to facilitate trade in the interest of the UK. Number 10, a deal on science and technology. So this is to keep Britain's involvement and commitment to European science projects. Number 11, cooperating on fighting crime. This is more to do with terrorism. And number 12 is a phased agreement beyond March 2019. So, really there is no interest for the UK to be on a cliff edge for businesses or a threat on stability. Instead, Theresa May wants to have reached a trade agreement about the future partnership by the time the 2-year Article 50 process has concluded. So that is a lovely 12-point plan. However, even though this is very nice, this doesn't really measure up to reality. What the leaders of the European project do not want is Britain to leave and set an example of how successful it is to the other member states. So it's not going to be easy, and here is some of the views of these Europhiles. So Jean-Claude Juncker ordered all members of the EU Commission not to engage any kind of contact with UK parties regarding Brexit. European Court President Donald Tusk told the UK that they would not be allowed access to the European single market unless they accepted the 4 freedoms for goods, capital, services, and people. German Foreign Secretary Frank-Walter Steinmeier met Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who was the leader of the Leave Brexit campaign, on November the 4th, 2016. Johnson stressed the importance of British-German relations, whereas Steinmeier responded that the German view was that the UK should have voted to stay in the EU and that the German priority was to preserve the remaining union of 27 members. There could be no negotiations before the UK formally gives notice. A long delay before beginning negotiations would be detrimental. Britain could not keep its advantages of the common market, but at the same time cancel less pleasant rules. So they're all kind of saying you can't have your cake and eat it, even though it's not really a cake. It's more like something you consume and it eats away at you. And to top it off, as part of the withdrawal negotiation, there could be a proposal for the UK to pay a divorce bill, reportedly up to 52 billion for EU services. Admittedly, the EU is not going to necessarily pay for something that it's not a part of. Figures from the ONS showed that Europe is gradually becoming a less important destination for UK companies. In 2000, 60% of exports went to other EU countries, but that fell to 58% in 2005, 54% in 2010, and 47% in 2015. Over the same period, imports from the EU remained consistent, accounting for 54% in both 2000 and 2015. Also, the UK service sector companies have close business links not to Europe but the US. According to the ONS, the UK exports to the EU 227 billion, as well as the UK imports from the EU 288 billion. The UK exports 61 billion less than it imports, making a balance of trade deficit, or what is called a negative trade balance. So trade deficits are paid for out of foreign exchange reserves. This may continue until such reserves are empty, at which point the importer can no longer purchase abroad. This is likely to have exchange rate implications, a loss of value in the deficit currency relative to the surplus economy's currency will change the relative price of tradable goods, and thus give a return to balance. In theory, the British pound should be depreciating against the euro to account for its trade deficit. This also means that the price of goods in the EU will inflate. Now people say, oh, well, protectionism, that's the way forward. However, you do lose utilising labour. So there's specialisation and development in, say, the EU sectors and in the UK sectors. If you do not open yourself up to this wide market, then you essentially are not utilising the capacity of all of this competition therefore you lower living standards. However, what has been happening in the global community is, say for example, China has been artificially keeping its currency low and buying US treasuries to give it a competitive advantage and to perpetuate the US to be a borrowing country. Now, a lot of the members of the Conservative government have been wording recently that no agreement is better than an agreement which disadvantages the UK. So here I'm going to forecast some predictions of that worst case scenario. This is whereby no trade agreements have been put in place and there is the hardest possible exit. Now, as I make these predictions, do not use this as your investment strategy. Do your own thinking and seek professional advice. So what I'm talking about here is a potential lockdown of trade between the two countries. Now, from the UK's perspective, that accounts to instant inflation because the price of goods or the availability of goods has now diminished and therefore more units of money is required to purchase the same types of goods which provide the same living standard. The bond market will see that the UK government and British businesses are less of a credit-worthy debtor because of its inability to trade. Therefore, they will demand higher yields for the bonds issued. So there's an inverse relationship. They would lower the price. This is additionally happening on a backdrop of people getting out of the British pound. This affects inflation of imported goods. However, as a business exporter in the UK, this gives a particular advantage. So you can expect the UK FTSE 100 in some ways to go up because of this advantage, particularly if they are an exporter. Now we come to the Bank of England. Current official cash rate is at 25 basis points, 0.25%. So the powers to monetarily stimulate the economy is incapacitated. Because the UK has a problem with the bond market requiring higher yield, the cost of servicing government debt is more expensive. Therefore, they have to raise interest rates to attract international bond investors. The problem here is the Bank of England is between a rock and a hard place. If they raise interest rates, that will put the UK economy in a downward spin. Their productive levels will go down. The majority of UK citizens are in high debt with high expense mortgages. Therefore, raising that base rate, even though that protects the currency, it makes it rise in value, it will scupper the economy. A direct recession, if not depression. And that increases the debt and the deficit of the UK government, which is incredibly high, even by wartime standards, since the bank bailouts in 2008. So there is the other option, which is to quantitative ease, and that is basically directly increasing the UK money supply and purchasing its own debt issuance, bonds or gilts. Now, this does increase liquidity and keep interest rates low. However, this does depreciate the British pound even further. The problem you may have here is that the inflation might get a bit too much. Now, what is reported inflation and what is actual inflation to the person on the street is two different things. But if it gets to a point where, say, petrol prices have doubled or the food shopping bill has tripled, then the people will demand that the pound doesn't depreciate any further. And thus, interest rates may rise. A real bad scenario. Either way, the most important thing that the government should be doing is to ensure that the productive side of the economy doesn't fall to waste and basically just get sold off, and not a transfer of wealth where it goes from one hand to another, but literally a fire sale and a scrapping of the productive side of the economy. That is the worst possible scenario. This is also happening on the side of heightened political tension. If there is any terrorist attacks, then you can quite easily see a highly nationalistic fascist movement getting very strong in Britain. So if there is a production wealth transfer from one hand to the other rather than a scrapping, this is an interesting time for the labour force of the UK. Exporting companies may increase its demand for workers. Obviously, an importing company is going to probably do a lot more layoffs. However, with a hard exit from the EU, you can imagine that the regulatory burden for businesses may improve, and if on the possibility that the unemployment rate doesn't get too out of control, then there will be a remain in demand for those foreign goods which no longer exist. Now, obviously, people, rather than going to Europe, will pick goods from other countries. However, that still could create domestic demand. Therefore, certain businesses in the UK may prosper with Europe not being a trading partner. For example, the UK fisheries may improve in the amount of fish stock that they can supply to the market, as, say, the French and Spanish can no longer fish in its waters. Now, the other thing that may happen as a backdrop to this is that because we're at the end of a bond bull cycle, this scenario could signal to the world market that countries' central banks who have got their cash rates at the lowest levels possible may need to raise interest rates again or have runaway inflation. This is obviously the worst possible scenario. Hopefully, an agreement can come together for Britain to at least remain a trading partner, and I do really wish the best for the UK. So thank you very much for your time. For the next episode, I do have Michael Acuna, who also advises his opinion on what potentially will happen in the circumstance of a Brexit, and he will focus on predominantly the labour situation of the people. Also, we go into a dialogue of many other topics. I recommend that episode. So thank you very much again. I'm not much of a superstitious person, but I will keep my fingers crossed for you, Britain.